Hey there, math fans. I'm Dr. Andy Lovelace, another baseball geometry video. I helped run a baseball league for years. This is a really vital video for anyone that ends up being a coach or a volunteer in a baseball league. As I've said before, I played baseball growing up. I had family members that played. My brother played college baseball, but I didn't really play into high school. I just played through middle school. But I ended up running a baseball league, and we'd go out to set up the field on days like this. This is people thinking I know what I'm doing. This is something called turfus that you set out, which is like a little, almost a gravelly dirt. And the idea is when water goes through it, so it keeps your field from getting muddy. If you don't put this out and it rains, your field immediately turns to mud. So it's really vital. You have to put it out every year. It's a big expense for a league. You have to try to get parents to come out. You drag the field. Even baseball people didn't know about this. There's no reason you would know it if you played baseball, really. There's very few that do. Many people that played baseball even through college don't know how to properly line a field. I've seen it a few times. They had to come to the math person. Once that's done, you then drag it out, spread it out, and it looks something like this. But then you always have this challenge of where in the world is second base. And many people don't realize this, but you spend a lot of time doing this. And this is where so many people value that I know some math. And you'll see why in a second. This is my son on this third base of our T-ball field. I found this picture because I have dug right here for hours over many years, trying to find that base peg every year because it's not well set in there. And so the place always gets muddy and it's not well lined. And so once it gets buried, it feels like it's impossible to find. A base peg is a really small thing, looks kind of like this. And once it's buried by a few inches of dirt, it's really hard to find. I remember digging here for like 30 minutes, trying everywhere I can. I had parents coming over telling me where I should dig, which was really helpful. Anyways, that's when I bought a measuring tape. I have a really long measuring tape because I hate digging. And then people would come to me every year when I'd be running this. We had 3 fields next to each other, and I was reliable every year that somebody from each field would come find me and say, how do I find the second base peg? One guy went home and got a metal detector. So there's a real need for this bit of math. The other, maybe more important tip is if you ever find yourself coaching T-ball, this is one of the most important coaching skills I ever learned. Which is when you put the ball on the tee, grab the bat and hold it until you're ready for them to swing. Saved many coaches' lives. All right. That's also a very important tip. So if you don't know, this is how, and some fields have it set up differently, but this is how most fields have it set up. You actually have to, the city gets really mad at you if you don't properly set this below ground level and if you don't put a plug over it, because otherwise people trip over it and it's a hazard, especially if your field is also used for other things. That is a ton of work to put those in. During the time I was running our league, we once switched the bases from 50 feet to 60 feet. And on a different field, we just switched it from 60 feet to 70 feet. And it was a pain in the rear because you had to first figure out where those things were, dig a hole. You had to make this. Sometimes we'd make it by pouring concrete and putting a peg in there to try to save money and do it ourselves. Again, I know nothing about this. But this is how it's always going to be. So if you're in a league, it's good to know a little bit of math. Okay, once you have that set and you've dug forever in hard dirt, you need every bit of tool. This is the time in my life when I bought a whole bunch of tools. Unfortunately, our league folded during the pandemic, which I feel terrible about. But anyways, there's an example of someone putting a base peg in. Often you have a lot of straight lines. You have a lot of geometry. If anyone's ever done a little bit of construction, you know that you have to use straight lines a lot. This person's doing a pretty darn good job trying to level it. There's all sorts of challenges. Then once they're in, you have to train coaches on how to make it so when you put it on there, it sits on there snugly, or else every time someone slides into it, it slowly breaks it apart, and you don't want to have to do it again. So you get this tool and you explain how to do it. And then you have to teach them how to line it, but that's a different story. Anyways, I learned all this stuff because I had to for the league, and I realized that most people don't know it. But the number one challenge every season was a season had gone by. And some fields leave their bases out, but you would then come to a field like this, and you would need to figure out where the base pegs were. And it was really hard to figure out. Some places are clever and they would like paint something on the corner of the fence so you had a rough estimate, but even that makes it hard to dig. So turns out your first job is to go to home plate and put a peg in the ground and then use that 6 inches of home plate to try to do a straight line. I mentioned this in a previous video. This is when you learn that why home plate is the shape that it is. You put a straight edge out, you measure 60 feet. You have to understand that 60 feet is the corner of the base. And often you can find first and third, but sometimes that itself takes a while. Then someone comes and says, where the heck is second base? Because what they do is they walk what they feel like is straight over and try to eyeball it. And then they eyeball it with third. And they start digging. Sometimes they're like 6 inches one way or the other. And you keep thinking you're going to get there. Sometimes you get lucky. But eventually, whether it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, then someone walks over and would ask me, how do I find it? So I'm going to answer that question here. So a little bit here. And here's my model again. This is T-Mobile Park. I've put the bases in there. As I already mentioned, this is a square. This is, like I said, this is how you learn this, is by having to do this. So I'm going to put in a square here. There's the square. The square touches, it's important you understand this before you dig, it touches the corner of second base. Now for a little league field, it's going to be like 60 feet. It touches this corner. So you have to remember when you're digging that you need to go another, it depends on the width of the bases for your league, but often another 6 inches beyond that before you start digging, and 6 inches to the right, but you find that corner first. But you really want to measure before you start digging, because digging is not fun. That's what my dad taught me. Digging is not fun. Those are the jobs he gave me because I was not competent enough to do anything else. Okay, so what people would do is they would say, well, I can't find second. It's not there. In fact, let's remove it. It's easy if you can see it. So let's remove second. There it goes. Let's remove the square because you don't have the square. And you just start walking. And you can see already how it's going to be hard to find. So typically what would happen is somebody would come over and they would ask me the following question. How far is it on a straight line to second? Which I thought was a good question. It's the right way to think about it. They put a straight line and they were like, here on this field, I was trying to put in a rubber, but it's not perfectly centered, which is another problem. But they were like, I'm just going to put it at the edge of home plate. I'm going to do a straight line through the middle of the rubber, and I'm going to go this distance, but I need a mathematician to tell me how far that is. So for baseball, this is 90. This is 90. And we're trying to figure out how far this is. And I usually would ask a kid nearby to say, I would say, hey, kid, do you know how to do this? Can you tell your parent? Because I found that most kids knew, but the parents didn't, which was always fun when a 12-year-old could tell their parent how to do this. But it's Pythagorean theorem. So let's call this, how about x? This is 90, and you get 90 squared. I don't know why I'm using that color. 90 squared plus 90 squared, you get this right triangle, is x squared. A lot of 45 and 90 degree triangles on a baseball field. So then you would get 2 times 90 squared. This is what because I was standing out on a baseball field and often didn't have a calculator. I know it's different now because we're carrying around phones, but even then, this is when I'd always break my phone every year. Okay, take the square root of both sides. And you really should simplify when you do that. So what about the plus or minus? Say we're working, so I would say the square root of 2 times 90. And I could do more and talk about how could we estimate this, but I feel like that already is going to make the video too long. So I would just ask a kid to calculate that for me. Now, actually, by the time I'd done this enough years in a row, I started to kind of know the numbers that we were almost always using. Like I said, every year this came up. But the numbers we were always using were this 60-foot one. By far, this was the most. When our kids got to 12, they were doing 70-foot bases. A lot of competitive leagues do that. And then 80-foot is often this in-between before kids get to high school. So anyways, this was a little more than 80, almost 85 feet. This was 99. I always remember this one because it was almost 100 feet across a 70-foot base. And then for Major League Baseball, it's 127 feet. Even then, I would get my long measuring tape and I would get pretty close, but I still found that it took me quite a bit of digging because I'd have to vary a little bit and I didn't know how far. So what if you don't have the measuring tape? What can you do? And you may already have an answer. I encourage you to think about it for a second. Usually you have a string because you need a string to line a field, but that's a video for another day. So what you can do is have someone stand at the corner of first base, the corner of that square. So this is my proposal. And this really teaches me a lot about his history, because historically, there's a lot of discussion in math about using straight edge and compass. And people sort of go, why did they do that? Well, that's what you have if you're out doing surveying sort of work. Okay, so what we're going to do is get 2, maybe 3 people if we can get it. It's hard to get volunteers. And we're going to put a string here and pull it tight. And we're going to put a string here and pull it tight. And then we're going to play a little game. You actually can do this with 2 people. By pulling it tight, we're keeping the distance 90 feet. And we're going to have this person walk out this way. And they can even make a mark in the dirt. And then we're going to have them come back and do the same with this one. Aha. That's how you find that point with the compass. Here, I'll show you. So we'll let the first one go. So just a moment here. So here's the first person standing right here. I'm going to draw a little line. And we're going to let them go. Boom. So they go there. Let's draw that. Here we go. That's it. And then we have the other person. Let's send this person back. They've marked some marks out there. And I don't think I ever did this, actually. It was only later that I realized, oh, I could have told them to do this. Okay, so now we're going to let this one go. Use purple here. There's that. We're going to start walking and holding the other one steady. You can do it yourself, but you need something to, often you're trying to find like a stake to put it in the ground, which is nice to have, and then maybe a rock to set on top of it. And then here we go. They go walking here. If you get them to go at the same time, you can see where they meet, which is kind of fun. Let's draw that one. And if you also have that tape measure, which is what I would do now because I'm old and my back hurts, I would do all 3. Would be my preference because I hate to dig. So if I ever do this again, I don't start digging until I've measured. I just hate that. So I then would have all of that marked off. I probably then would calculate how far it is to the center of the base, how many inches it is. Because I really want to dig right on the right spot. Still might take you a minute or 2, but then at least you can dig with confidence, which is much better. And then hopefully you find it. So here it is. Let's put it in there. Boom. Boom. And we got it. And we did 3 different measurements to put us right on that corner where it's at. All right, hope you found that interesting, just a little bit to save you if you're ever working on baseball field. Remember Pythagoras. But ultimately, I've given you a few tools for measuring, which are quite valuable, at least from my years of running baseball leagues.